Hey there, Gators. This is a lecture review for Chapter 5, entitled Entering the Social World for Psych 230. What we're going to talk about for this lecture review, generally we're going to mention Erikson, and talk about attachment and how that's formed, emotions, and then play and gender. So those are our big learning objectives for this unit. The first person we need to start with is Erik Erikson. Erikson is a huge, really important developmental theorist. So we'll talk about Erikson starting now all the way up through the end of life. Erikson really focused on psychosocial growth, so that social aspect is important. He was looking at relationships between people and how this matters for our development. He's got many stages, so you may have heard of this kind of format before, like something versus something, trust versus mistrust, initiative versus guilt. This is Erikson's theory. So you can see it really is truly lifespan. We go from birth and we go to late life with the, little chunks of that theory relevant to each part of our lifespan. What he says at this point is that we have these conflicts that we have to manage. So the very first one you have to manage is trust versus mistrust. So you have to learn a healthy balance between these two. We want to trust people generally, but we can't trust everybody and everything. So we want to learn that the world is a good place, but get that healthy kind of balance. That's where we start. And we'll start there for the for Chapter 5. But we'll keep coming back to Erikson as we go through our whole unit, and we'll end with him when we get to late life and death. So really, Erikson is a true lifespan guy. We'll look at this one for birth to a year, which is trust and mistrust, 1 to 3 years, autonomy and shame, and initiative and guilt, 3 to 6 years. So we'll start with his stages. Basic trust versus mistrust, as I just mentioned, we're supposed to kind of have both of trust and mistrust. We want to learn that the world is largely good, but we also want to learn that sometimes we can't trust certain things or people. That way we're not just blindly walking around trusting everyone and everything. So the goal would be, if we get this basic trust and mistrust, then we would have hope that the world is a good place. So I personally will stare at babies in supermarkets like this big happy face, trying to indicate that. Like, the world is trustworthy, you're good, you're valuable, we want you here, you can trust us, it's a good place. The next stage is a little bit older kids. With this one, we're talking about autonomy versus shame and doubt. So can they do things by themselves? It's more of that autonomy. Can I act upon forces in my own will? Versus being riddled with shame or feelings that you can't do something. So we want kids to have some level of shame and doubt, but we also really want to stimulate that autonomy. So the balance of this is will. They'll learn that they can act with their own free will, but that they want to be careful not to just run over the rights of others. That they do have some things that they need some help with, which is that shame and doubt kind of component. A lot of what we're doing at this time is more of the toilet training. So yes, I can use the toilet by myself, I have autonomy, but then I also need some help to make sure that I'm not left in a shameful situation. So we're going to mix these two and hopefully get will. The very last stage that we'll talk about for Chapter 5, although far from the last stage in Erikson, is initiative versus guilt. With this one, we want to be able to take initiative in our environment and say, this is what I want to do. I want to tell you my own thoughts, my own goals, but then also not railroad others. So then we feel guilt if we, overrun other people. We don't let them share their own initiative, their own feelings. So we want to be right in there in that middle. We take initiative, but we also respect the rights of others. So with this, we get balance of purpose. And we would take initiative, but also be really cooperative with others. And this time is where we really see kids focusing on learning how to play socially with other people. So Erikson is a really big important developmental theorist. Another really important area of development that we're going to talk about that really is lifelong is attachment. So attachment theory, if you Google attachment theory, you will find a ton of scholarly resources on attachment. So what this is that very first, or those first, multiple enduring emotional relationships. This is often between the mother and the child is how we've conceptualized attachment theory, but you can also have, grandparents, fathers, other attachment figures as well. It's really critical to learning trust versus mistrust, so I can trust this individual to meet my needs, and it helps promote survival. So if you think about being a brand new infant, if you don't have someone you can trust to feed you, to change you, to love on you, you're not going to be likely to survive. So that attachment bond that forms between parent and child, caregiver and child, is so important, not only for the baby's survival, but also just for kind of laying that underpinning of who they'll be as a person. Just an aside about father-infant relationships. So as I mentioned with attachment theory, a lot of this work really is focused on moms and babies. So we don't have as much work with dads and babies, but we're getting there. We're learning more. So traditionally, we thought of the dad as the playmate, the mothers as the comfort. The dad was engaging mostly in rough and tumble play. But these differences really are less pronounced now. So we're seeing a lot more dads who are stay-at-home fathers, who are engaging in more of the caregiving, not just the playing. Dad's role has really been changing quite a bit and diversifying a lot. So we'll bring us back into attachment real quick. The attachment, how we actually study this, when we're talking about infants, young children, we obviously can't ask them, how's that relationship going with your mom and your dad? We can't ask them that. So in order to look at that, we have to be more, interesting. We have to come up with something creative. I was going to say sneaky, but we don't really want to say sneaky. It's more creative. So with this, we put babies in what we call a strange situation. So they come into a laboratory environment. They end up sitting there with the mother and another person. So typically, the research assistant. The mom will walk out of the room and the mom will return. So the child and the mother are together. Mom leaves. Mom returns. These are some of the most important aspects of this strange situation. There are other ways, other variations that happen, but really we're looking for this, mother leave, mother return. What we observe then is how the kid reacts here. So this is another kind of description of what's happening here in this strange situation. But what we're observing is the kid's behavior. How do they act? And once we view that kid's behavior, we're able to put kids generally into styles or types. This is not perfect, but it's still really, really excellent research. With this, we see that many kids are what we would classify as secure. So when mom leaves, they might cry a little bit, might go to the door, oh, my mom, my mom. When she gets back, the child is approaching the mom or the caregiver. I'm just using mom because that's traditional research here, but they approach the caregiver and they're soothed. Okay, I was a little worried. You left. I wasn't feeling that. You came back. I'm okay now. They feel good. Insecure types are a couple different. So we've got that secure type baby first. The insecure types act differently from each other. So the avoidant dismissing, about 20% of babies will be like this. They're not really showing a lot of outward upset when the mom leaves. So he left. When mom gets back, they often ignore mom. So they don't really approach her and say, oh, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. But if we look at their body, if we read, their heart rate, we look at their skin conductance, they're stressed. You can see it. You can see it in their body, but they're not showing it on their face. They're not showing it in the way they act. So their behavior and their body, their physiology don't match up. Another insecure type is our resistant, preoccupied kids. With these kids, mom leaves, they freak out. My mom's gone, the world is over, I'm stressed. Separation upsets them. But when mom gets back, they're also upset. They can't use mom to calm down. So they can't say, oh, you came back, I feel better. Oh, instead they're just still upset. They might still shriek, they might still cry, really, really hard to console. Our fourth type of baby is the disorganized, fearful baby. We don't see as many of these babies, but what they do is kind of this unorganized or just, not really sure what to expect from their behavior. So they just seem confused, they don't really know how to act. They might approach mom and cry a little bit, run away, come back and approach her again, run away. It doesn't mean that there's abuse in that situation, but it can be a symptom of that. So sometimes if you see someone with a disorganized attachment, there's probably something going on maybe in that parent-child relationship. Attachment in the long term. So if we're looking at this with, young children, with babies, the reason why we care about this is because you can map attachment onto long-term outcomes. It's not perfect. So, if you had a certain attachment style, maybe one of the insecure attachment styles as a kid, it doesn't mean that's what you're going to have for sure as an adult. All it means is that there's a link there. So as children, we end up seeing secure kids are able to separate from parent. They can seek comfort. As adults, they're able to do that as well. They use that, partner as a secure base. They seek comfort, but they're not obsessed with the partner. They can, be without them for a little while. So insecure babies then, the ones who are in those other three categories, often have more difficulties depending on how their relationship was formed, because it's an interesting thing, how we determine this quality of the relationship. So it's really interesting. So secure attachment really seems to develop by that parent being available and sensitive. It creates this model inside the baby, and the baby's not able to, say this or anything. This is a theory. But the theory is that the baby learns that I'm a good person and the people who care for me are good people. Then they would take that model and go throughout life in the same way. So I'm good, you're good. I'm good, you're good. I trust you, I trust me. That's how they approach their relationships. The babies who were more insecure, who didn't have that kind of parenting, they had to modify to the parenting that they had. So, it's survival. You have to keep that parent close to you. You can't just say, well, I wish my parent was a little bit more warm, so screw it. You can't do that. You have to keep that parent close to you to survive. And so babies will modify their behavior to make sure that that relationship continues. So what they learn then is either I'm not trustworthy or other people aren't trustworthy, depending on their attachment style. So in this box here, you can see the secure babies, they have that positive view of self and others. Our dismissing babies at the bottom box here, they think I'm good, I can trust myself, I'm calm, I can regulate my emotions, but I can't trust other people. So they've learned that other people, their parents don't really respond to distress, they don't need to share their distress with other people, and they would carry that then through with romantic relationships. So I don't want to get too close to you. Our preoccupied babies are here in the top corner. With these, they learn that themselves, they can't control their own thoughts, or their feelings, their emotions. They're not good in and of themselves. They rely on other people. So this is the kind of person who whose mom maybe was inconsistent with her caregiving. So sometimes she'd come and give love, other times not so much. They had to heighten their distress to get her close. And so what they learn is they need other people. So these are the people who are obsessed with romantic relationships, very, very clingy, needs that partner around. Our fearful kids, those are the ones that don't always mean abuse, but can happen in that situation. They learn that they can't trust themselves and they can't trust others. So that's a really hard relationship to be in with an adult. If you think, I'm not worthy, you're not worthy. This isn't meaning that this is destiny. So just that first relationship just kind of sets our path, but we can have a lot of things happen that change us for in a more positive way. So we even call that like earning your security. So people can earn and, through good quality relationships with other people, earn those feelings of being able to trust. A big thing with attachment research, people were really, really worried. So when women started to go back to the workplace, infiltrating that workplace, getting those jobs, they're like, what about the babies? What about the babies? So there's been research then, what about the babies? And what they found is that those good quality daycares, really we're not seeing effects on attachment. So it's not as if we put kids in daycare and then you pick them up at 5 p.m. and their attachment is broken. It's not like that at all, especially those good quality relationships, those good quality daycares that really stimulate those relationships. Kids are doing really well there. So attachment really does seem to be pretty unrelated to daycare. That brings us into the next topic, which is emotions. Emotions are really strongly tied into attachment, but we need to talk a little bit about how we see them develop. So emotions really have adaptive value for us. They're critical for these social relationships. If you were to walk into a room with someone that you're hanging out with, and you see them looking like this James Van Der Beek here, and he's crying, he's emotional, this is going to signal to you that something needs to happen here. So he needs your attention. So these emotions really have value. Kids early on have emotions. So we're able to see those kind of basic emotions, around 9 months being really well defined. We can see, sadness and anger and fear. These basic emotions have different components. So they have that feeling that you label as an emotion, like I am sad. They have that change in your body. So sadness, you might see some tears, some sweats. And then they have overt behavior. So the crying behavior, the withdrawal behavior. So those are our components of emotions. Kids will learn those basic ones pretty early on. The complex ones take a while. So these are things like guilt, embarrassment, and pride. And with these, we're really relating ourselves to others. So this takes a while before you can understand yourself and other people. We don't really feel guilt at hurting someone else unless we learn we are a person and they are a person and we have impinged upon them. So it takes a while to get those feelings, more 18 to 24 months. We use our emotions really strongly, so we reference other people, social referencing. So if I were to come to your house and meet your kid and bring this doll to your child, your kid might say, oh, cool doll, and they would like it. You would probably pick the thing up and throw it across the room into the fireplace. Then the kid is going to be like, oh, I'm scared too now. They have referenced your emotions of fear towards this doll and would change their own emotions. So we look to each other for how to figure out, how do we regulate our emotions? Social referencing. Kids will do this very, very early on. Emotion regulation is something that develops as we grow. With this, we can control what we feel and what we communicate to others. So this depends a lot on our ability to think. So if you've got this scary clown come up and they just kind of come in your environment, if you've got this, precious little baby here they're not really able to think through this as well. So to regulate their emotions, they're going to try to maybe cry for help. Help me, mom, help me, dad, cry. They may look away. They may block their face. They're going to do things that they can do with their motor movements and with signaling others. We've got this child here who sees the clown arise. She's got a lot more cognition. So that emotion regulation piece becomes more sophisticated. She can still reach out for others. She could still hide. But she can also tell herself things like, oh, it's just uncle in a mask. Or, this isn't something to be afraid of. Or I saw that movie and it was totally fine. That's not a scary thing. So she can think about these things. So our ability to regulate our emotions really increases throughout our life. We even see that, as we age and become, adults in the workplace. We learn to control our emotions. Instead of saying, coworker, you made me so angry I could scream, you might just say, let me take a short walk and come back and control this, in a more professional manner. So this develops throughout life. That brings us into play. Play is huge. Play is the work of childhood, according to Piaget. So we've spent a lot of our childhood playing. Hopefully, most of us have done that. We play with different things. We play in different ways. But play is just so important. We start seeing these specific shifts in our play that are typically age-graded, associated more with age. Around 12 months, we're doing more parallel play. So with this, we're, kind of just in parallel with another child, but we're not really interacting with them. So it might just be two kids kind of hanging out, playing with the Lego table, but they're not talking or really interacting. Around 15 to 18 months, we get more of the simple social play. So with this, they're still kind of building their own tower, building their own blocks, but they might occasionally switch some or mention something to each other. There's starting to be some of that interaction. And around 24 months is when we really get that good cooperative play. So we've got the kids here in this picture. They're all cooperating to have a tea party with those stuffed animals. So it's a little bit easier for them to kind of be a big group in their play. Playing pretend is something that's really important for kids. We see kids do this naturally, something they don't need to be taught. Their imagination is, a great way for them to think through different things in the world, different scenarios. A lot of it's tied to values and traditions in the culture, so they're playing through what it means to be Japanese. I'm going to play that out in my culture. I've seen this in my culture. I'm going to play what this means. Or they play out things that are frightening to them. So like the floor is lava. So what would happen if my whole floor was, dissolved and it was scary? Or, what if a robber came in my house? And so they play these topics out and gain some freedom of, control, gain some insight into their culture. So we think play is super important. Things become abstract. So we've got the cup and the block up there, just saying initially we might need a cup and say, this is the tea party cup. But as we become more abstract, we can say, oh, this block is a cup. That cardboard box is a spaceship. This water bottle is a telephone. It just becomes more abstract. And this is really, really important for that cognitive development. So kids are playing out fears, they're playing out wants and desires and hopes, and they're just exploring who they can be. So play is so important. We see some gender differences in play pretty early on. So one gender, we're seeing more rough and tumble, competitive type play, more constricting statements like, mine is better, let's go do this. So I'm better, let's go play, I'm going to control the situation. With our other gender, we see more cooperative, pro-social type play and enabling statements. You did great there, oh, I love that, what's next? Yay, thanks for coming. Some of these more statements that are like, let's take the lead together, let's mutually, perform this act. So if you think about which gender we're likely to see, I'm sure this isn't difficult for you to see, where we're likely falling in. Our boys are doing more constricting, girls doing more enabling. This is not a guarantee. Obviously, we can have a lot of differentiation between genders and expression and toy play. Just saying on average, this is what we see. There's some big generational differences in play, though. So I put this picture up and generally just ask, what does this mean for play? And for some people, this may mean nothing for play. But for many, this was something where the street lights came on, you better get your butt back in the house. So that was the generational shift there. Street lights mean come on home. And so this has shifted in certain cultures, especially here in the United States, although this is more of a British culture here, or British culture. But this is somewhere where we can see these individuals here. So we've got the great-grandfather. George, age 8 in 1919, could walk 6 miles to go fishing. The grandfather, aged 8 in 1950, could walk a mile. The mother was age 8 in 1979, could walk half a mile to the pool. Now the son is 8 and allowed to walk to the end of his driveway, which is 300 yards. So we've gone from an 8-year-old's having, in 1919, 6 miles of wide range to having 300 yards in more recent years. And so the NPR article that came from is cited below. So this is just one case study of a family, but we do see this generally, being a trend where we have less and less freedom. We're also seeing more trends where against active play and more towards structured, sedentary, solitary play. So the active free play is where kids get to decide what it is they're going to do. So it's free, no one's deciding that for them, and it's also active. So it might be outdoors or indoors, but they're using their body and gross motor skills. The structured play is something adults delineate. So the adults would say, this is the game we're playing, these are the rules, and here's how you do it. The sedentary is more sitting, not using gross motor skills, and solitary is by themselves. So we see a lot more adult-guided and sedentary solitary play. And why? Why do we see this? So if you think about this, these patterns, so this shrinking of the area in which we're allowed to interact, this different type of play, this is not something that developmental psychologists would say would be a great thing. So we would like to see kids with more freedom, more gross motor, more activity, less sedentary, more social. But we often see these for many reasons. So some of it is just our shifting culture. Some of it is parental fear as to, what's out there in the environment. We've got that 24-hour news cycle. We're always seeing bad things that can happen to anybody at any time. And it can be pretty overwhelming to kind of live in that environment. So there's a lot of reasons, why we see these shifts and these changes. We're not as rural as we used to be. So a 6-mile area might have just been woods. At one point now, you might be crossing 10 neighborhoods in a 6-mile area with all the people that entails, all the different risk factors. So there is a lot of reasons underlying this. But, it's not to say that this is happening everywhere. So there are some more or countercultural type movements. The 2 playgrounds up top are trash playgrounds or garbage playgrounds. What these are, they're actually pretty safe. So they're not filled with like needles or broken prophylactics or something. They're not dirty, but they kind of give kids that illusion of having more structure or less structure, more time to just interact with the environment in and of itself. And adults then are not allowed to go in there and play. They have to more stand on the outsides of those playgrounds. We also see the free-range parenting movement, which is an interesting kind of countercultural movement. With this, it's parents saying, I'm not going to regulate how close you stay to home or what it is you do there. Instead, the world is kind of your oyster and go out and explore. There's been parents who have made the news for this. Many times I've got a link linked in there. But things like letting an 8-year-old ride the subway home from school by themselves in New York, or letting them walk, 10 blocks to the park without parental supervision. So these are controversial things that a lot of people have strong opinions on. How do we let kids best play? How do we let them build autonomy while keeping them safe? It's not something that has a lot of easy answers, and it is very culturally bound. That brings us to one of our very last topics here for Chapter 5. And for this, we're talking about gender. So if your friend calls you, they say, hey, guess what? I just had a baby. Probably one of the very first things you're going to ask is, did you have a boy or a girl? And that is going to dictate a lot of what you do for this friend. So are you going to bring a pink outfit or a blue outfit? Are you going to bring a stuffed bear? Or are you going to bring a stuffed kitty cat? What are you going to do for this kid? So once you find out their gender, it tells you a lot. Gender is not an easy term, though. It's something there's a lot of terminology that goes with it. There's a lot of aspects that are more interesting. So gender, our social role, is the cultural guidelines for our behavior. So we all have social roles. We live out many social roles, not just gender. You live out social roles for your age, for your occupation, for your race, ethnicity, for just tons of different roles we have for people. So those are what we expect, and we have stereotypes that align with these expectations. So if I were to ask you to list out some stereotypes of men and women, this would not be a difficult task for you to do. We all live in this culture, even if you don't subscribe to them, to those gender stereotypes yourself, we still understand that they exist. So you'd still be able to say, men kill the intruders and the bugs, and women cook the meal and clean the laundry. we know that these things are part of our culture, even if we ourselves do not subscribe to them. So where do they come from? We know them. We know these stereotypes. We know these expectations. A lot of where we think they come from is the culture, really, the environment. So parents, especially dads, often reinforce these appropriate behaviors. So if you've got a young boy, if you think about reinforcing, you've got a young boy who brings up a G.I. Joe and says, "Daddy, I want you to buy this for me." The dad might say, "Great, awesome, let's get it." Then think about the little boy who brings up the Barbie with the long flowing hair and says, "Daddy, I'd like you to buy this for me." We might see some dads who say, "Yes, absolutely." We might see some who slap it out of the boy's hand or who encourage another toy. So, we shape and model these appropriate behaviors all the time without even thinking about it. Not just dads, of course, but dads seem to be the more of the gatekeeper of gender for many reasons. Peer influence also starts super, super early. So I've got a picture of painted nails there because I was painting my nails and my daughter's nails. My daughter's older. And then my son was like, "Oh, I want you to paint my nails." So I painted his nails, this really pretty seafoam bluish color. And he goes in and he sits down with his friends. He's about 4 years old. And the other 4-year-old turns around, looks at him and says, "Why you got your nails painted? Are you a girl?" And then my son was like, "No, I'm not a girl." And I could tell that it bothered him even at 4. And then he's never really wanted me to paint his nails again. So that peer influence of somebody asking him, are you of a different gender? And two, also thinking that was an insult is something also we see, run like a girl or other types of insults that are gender-based. So we learn these things very, very early on. We've got some comics in there that kind of show some of that too. Gender identity is something that we learn very early on as well. So that gender of the self, and that's that sense of self. So if it's something that's a part of you is your gender identity. Kohlberg says we learn this through stages. So at labeling, we learn I am a boy. So 2 to 3, I am boy, I am a girl. I have a label, and that's my gender identity. As we get a little bit older in preschool age, we learn it's stable. So not only am I a boy today, I will be a man. Not only am I a girl today, I will be a woman. But we don't really learn until 4 to 7 years that it's constant. So, even if I grow my hair out, I am still a boy. Even if my sister gets a pixie cut, she is still a girl. Or puts on pants, she is a girl. It takes a while for them to get that stable sense of identity. So many times, with my son being 4, that preschool age, when he had his nails painted, he's got that stability, but he doesn't really have that constancy to say, "Oh, I have fingernail polish on my nails, but that doesn't mean I'm a girl now." He didn't really quite have that yet. Gender schema theory is another theory of how we develop. With this, we decide, is this thing that I'm interacting with for girls or boys? Is it for males? Is it for females? You make that decision, and then you decide whether or not you're going to interact with it. So if I want to do a career that I've never heard of, maybe I want to be a whale expert. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of anything. A whale expert. I want to study whales. And then I look that up, and all I see is females studying whales. I might decide, okay, that's a female activity. I will now interact with whales. Or if I see only males, it's a male activity. This is not for me. So we make those decisions based on what we see as representation. So that's why some places like Target here is going to remove some of those gender-based signs in their toys. Because what they're trying to say there is these toys can be available for all children. So if you have a little boy who's expecting a sibling soon, maybe it makes sense really for you to go get him that doll baby, or if he just wants it. It's not going to make him a girl. So we don't have to label the toys as pink and blue. But we are super, super labeled in our society. So it's not to say that this, isn't a thing. This is a photo project that a photographer did where she put kids in their rooms. The little girl's hard to see. She's way back here in the corner. But we've got a little boy and a little girl, and then all of the gendered items that they have, that they possess in their rooms. So we can see this color scheme, this gendering is huge. Even toothbrushes and toothpaste and, any kind of item you can think of is gendered for us. It's not to say it's all from culture. So I know there's, why is this persistent then? If it's just all culture. It's not all culture. There are biological influences, so evolutionary theory is a really important one, saying that there might be some adaptive preferences. So with men trying to be more strong and brave and fighting the threats and the predators, maybe that's why they want to play then with G.I. Joe, kind of playing out that masculine role. We also see this for influences for hormones. So with girls who have a exposure in utero to more testosterone, when they're born, this is called the CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, is what these individuals would be diagnosed with. But they're females, but they have a preference for masculine activities. So they play more of those constricting type games, often prefer to play with boys, many times will identify as lesbian as they grow. So it's that, that hormone, that testosterone, seems to masculinize these preferences. So it's not all culture. There is a biological aspect. So really what we're seeing is there's a big kind of gender is a mix. It's a mix of what we come into the world with, our biology. It's a mix of our social influence, and it's a mix of how we view ourselves. So it's a really, really important topic. There also is some people kind of looking more at gender neutrality. So this idea of, should we raise kids, being more neutral to gender? Should we try and explore more of these options available to kids? Let the boys play with the doll baby here, let's put the girl on the tractor kind of thing. So that's more of a gender neutrality. I also have another link in here that got a lot of press in years past about a baby named Storm who was actually being raised genderless. So with this, Storm did possess body parts that were male or female, I'm not sure, they never said. But they did possess body parts, but instead of saying this is a girl or boy, the parents just said, this is Storm, and Storm doesn't have a gender. So they were hoping with that Storm would be able to select their own gender as they grew. So we've got this idea of being kind of more neutral and letting people explore, as well as some people just saying, I'm going to go genderless. And there are some actual differences between men and women. So this whole, talking about gender being culturally defined is not to say that there are no differences that are seen. We do see some differences. So especially in things like verbal and emotional sensibilities, girls often being able to control impulses a little bit more, having better memory, boys often being more aggressive and better able to handle spatial tasks. So that's just kind of a very brief overview. So there are some differences. There is some biological aspects as well, but generally we're pretty strongly based in our culture. So that finishes up material for Chapter 5, looking at socio-emotional development. Bye.